episode number 256 of the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. My guest today is Cassie Everett. Cassie has practiced homeopathy for the past 17 years and is specialized in fertility for the last 13 years. She also lectures, provides practical courses, and supervises students. Her client base extends worldwide, and she was trained at the Center for Homeopathic Education and is a Foresight Practitioner, which is the charity that pioneered the concept of preconception care. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I'm Michelle, a fertility acupuncturist here to provide you with resources on how to create a wholesome approach to your fertility journey. Welcome to the podcast, Cassie.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
So we just had a really fun pre-talk about Dr. Joe Dispenza, and we're going to get back into that conversation and homeopathy. But before we get started, I would love for you to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about you and your background and how you got into the work that you do.
Okay, so basically I've been a homeopath now for the last 17, almost 18 years. And I got into it because I basically had really bad acne in my early 20s. And I had tried, loads of different things from the doctors and nothing would really helped. And the next thing they were offering me was, I think you guys call it Accutane in the US. And I was really kind of reluctant to go down that road. And something just was like, oh no, it feels a bit too crazy. So I said to the doctor at the time, could I try something natural, like, I don't know, homeopathy? And I honestly, to this day, don't know where that thought kind of came from really, because I certainly wasn't brought up with, these sorts of approaches at all. But I had this incredible brand new doctor fresh out of medical school. And she was like, oh yeah, I can refer you to the homeopathic hospital. And because at that time, we're talking way over 20 years ago now, in the UK, you could actually be referred to a medical homeopath, on the NHS. And so I had to wait a year because it wasn't classified as like important really. But yeah, I had this, appointment with this doctor and I was with her for half an hour, and she was asking me all sorts of questions about my skin, but also about me and my personality. Did I like being by the mountains? Did I like being by the sea? What type of person was I? And I was so fascinated, like she really wanted to understand who I was and what made me tick. So, I had so much curiosity around that. And so I was at a real kind of crossroads in my life and was really unhappy with the work I was doing. And so I ended up thinking, well, I'll just study homeopathy for a year, just see how it is, while I think about what I'm going to do with my life. And then the moment I started at the homeopathy course, I was like, wow, this is incredible. It just opened my eyes to so many different things. And it made so much sense, the mind-body connection, using the body's own innate healing mechanism. I was just like, wow, my mind was blown. And, I was really fortunate because I was, in my early 20s, so it was great. And but I ended up working in the field of fertility and kind of female hormone balance because, being in my early 20s, all these young women were coming to see me with all these period problems, irregular cycles, really bad PMS, amenorrhea, all sorts of different things. And homeopathy was just working amazingly. And so I could really see, in the UK, things are a little bit different because we have to we have free health care. Well, I'd say it's free. It's kind of not, but it kind of is. And so I really wanted to, become a professional homeopath. I didn't want it to be a hobby. I wanted to make a living. And so I was thinking, actually, by specializing, firstly, in something, it helps you to, become really good and have a reputation. But also people kind of, well, they want to spend money on their children and their pets. And so fertility married that children and hormones for me. And so that's how I sort of ended up going down this road, really.
It's amazing. First of all, I have to say, it's interesting because there are people that would say, oh, it's probably placebo, but it works for pets and it works for babies
Yeah.
and little kids. So that takes out the whole placebo aspect of it. And that's where I find it so fascinating. So for people who are not familiar with homeopathy, can you give us a little introduction on like what it is, how it works, and how you administer it for people?
Yeah, absolutely. So, homeopathic remedies can be made from any substance in the world. They're very well known to be made from like herbs and plants and minerals. Um, but it's almost like the healing property of the substance is kind of extracted, almost like an alchemic process, where you're taking the healing properties of that herb, let's say, but without the potential side effects. So it's a dilution process, but also a succussion, which is like a shaking process. And yeah, you're basically creating energetic medicine, which works in a very similar way to acupuncture,
Mm-hmm.
basically. So the way I describe it to my clients in terms of how it actually works. So if you imagine that your body is like a computer and you've got different computer programming information that run all the different systems. So you've got your reproductive system, your digestive system, your nervous system, and everything works perfectly. We don't have to think about it. It's just all happening, without even a second thought. But when, stresses come along, so our body is very adaptable. We can cope with a certain level of stress. But when we get lots of stresses coming at us from lots of different directions, it's almost as if we lose some of that computer programming information. And that creates this kind of feedback loop kind of message that says, hang on a minute, I've lost some of this computer programming information. So it produces a symptom in the body, and that tells us that something is wrong. And so what I do as the homeopath is I try and find the homeopathic medicine that acts like the missing computer program information. So you give that back to the body, and then the body goes, oh, yeah, okay, I remember now. And then it helps to basically heal itself because, as if we break a bone, if you go to the doctor, they put a plaster cast on there, but the body does the knitting of the bone back together. The body has an incredible self-healing mechanism, but sometimes it gets stuck where it's
Mm-hmm.
forgotten. And so what I'm doing is helping to jog the body's memory, back into
Amazing.
motion. Yeah.
And it doesn't just work on the body, it really works on the mind too. It can really work on the emotions as
It
well.
absolutely does. It's incredible, and certainly from a fertility perspective, something that I've seen time and time again is it brings acceptance. It releases suppressed emotions because, as I'm sure you'll agree, lots of women end up kind of suppressing their feelings, perhaps from social situations, all sorts of different scenarios where they're kind of having to sort of stuff feelings down, and so homeopathy can be brilliant at helping to release that emotion so that it frees you up again, to have good energy, much more balanced and just in optimal health, really. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting how so many different modes of therapy work in tandem. Like they're kind of similar, they kind of say similar things, but in a different way. I think of tapping, for example. Tapping is one of the ways where you're really acknowledging what you're feeling. You immerse yourself in the feeling so that you're able to move that energy. And when you move that energy, that's when you become more free. When you're free, your energy, your vitality is free flowing, and then everything falls into place as we were designed to do.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. I think stress, on a fertility journey is kind of twofold, isn't it? Sometimes there's potentially stress that's kind of caused the problem in the first place, but then there's the stress of being on a long-term journey, and so it can create so many emotional imbalances. So yeah, all these different tools can work so well together as well, synergistically. I've got so many clients who perhaps are having acupuncture as well as having the homeopathy, or they're perhaps using tapping or hypnotherapy, alongside, and it's so helpful. And I think, with quite a lot of cases, when you've got several different modalities working together, it's more powerful, and you can get results quicker.
Absolutely. So quick question. I'm curious because I know that fibroids are very difficult. They're kind of difficult to treat when they're big, when they're like really to a point where they're too big. Sometimes I even suggest, okay, let's do Western medicine in certain circumstances because, it's not that complicated. Now they have robotics. It's really easy to take out, especially if it's a specialist. So yeah, we need both for sure, but I would love to know how homeopathy treats like things like fibroids or even endometriosis. How does that work? What have you seen as far as how people did?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think what's really difficult is that because women have got their hormones coming through every month that are potentially growing things like fibroids and endometriosis, you're kind of almost at loggerheads, aren't you? Because what's feeding the fibroid is kind of just a natural part of the female process, and that's why often the medical profession want to perhaps put you on the contraceptive pill. They want to suppress the system. They want to shut it right down, but obviously that doesn't work when you're on a fertility journey. So absolutely. So obviously, as we know, when the body is growing things that in the body, it's kind of twofold. There's the estrogens that are coming in, the xenoestrogens that are kind of growing things. And then there's also how efficiently the body is clearing those estrogens out. So often that's kind of the job of the liver.
Mm-hmm.
So using homeopathic remedies to support liver detoxification is obviously a key aspect. I'm sure you already do that as well. But from a homeopathic perspective, a really interesting area that we have are things called miasms. So miasms are like genetic tendencies that we inherit from our family members. So we've all got genetic tendencies, genetic weaknesses. But within the homeopathic philosophy, we kind of go into it in a little bit more detail. We don't just look at kind of disease patterns. We look at emotional patterns. We look at even the type of jobs people have can indicate the miasms that are most strongly prevalent in that particular person's family or that particular person's life. So we've all got all these genetic weaknesses, but certain weaknesses are kind of stronger in certain people and they get woken up by stresses. So one of the genetic weaknesses we call the psychotic miasm, which is born out of gonorrhea, believe it or not. So if you imagine your ancient ancestors may well have had gonorrhea, like physically, potentially. And so that taint of that, even though, it might have been your auntie's mother's grandmother's sister, it's still potentially in your genetic makeup. And it's like potentially a sleeping dog, okay? It's there, but it potentially can get woken up by these stressful events. And that can be all sorts of things. It could be, stressful things that we think of, like having a really dominant boss in your work or moving to a new country, those sorts of stresses. But it could also be a new sexual partner, and they could wake this up in you. Okay, so it's hard to wrap your head around it, but certainly that gonorrhea, so the psychotic miasm, has a tendency to grow things in the body that we don't want. It has this overproduction, this overgrowth. So that could be overproduction of mucus, which, as you know, can block the fallopian tubes, so that could be an issue around ectopic pregnancies. But overgrowth can be endometrial tissue, it can be fibroids, polyps, cysts, all these sorts of things. So when I'm treating people, I'm potentially looking at signs of the psychotic miasm in their medical history. I'm also, like we were talking about, strengthening their liver. I'm also potentially looking at their constitutional type. So, like everyone's got quite a personality. Some people like certain foods. Some people like run really hot body temperature. Some people are really kind of outgoing, and some people are really shy. So all these things have got like constitutional pictures, if you like. That's what we call them within the homeopathic world. And so you can also use remedies to boost that person's constitution and strengthen them. So I'm sort of using a combination of approaches with a case like that, because obviously, as you're very well aware, they're quite complex cases. But certainly homeopathy has proven really, really helpful. But I'm in agreement with you. I think when a fibroid gets so large, there becomes a point where actually cutting it out in some instances is the best option. And then you're treating the causation so as to stop
Right.
that process happening again. And that's the thing, isn't it? That's what we can potentially do that perhaps the medical profession haven't necessarily got answers for. Yeah.
Right. And that's ultimately, ideally, is when we can work together in harmony with different types of medicine and
Yeah.
technology. And I think that that's ultimately how hopefully the future is going to be, where we can use all of the modalities together, complementary. And do you ever use multiple remedies, or do you always just do it one at a time?
Yeah, good question. So, in the US, for example, there's quite a lot of classical homeopaths who are very much
Mhm.
into giving one remedy at a time. And when homeopathy was first kind of invented, if you like, hundreds of years ago, that was much easier because people lived a much cleaner life. There was less toxicity, less stress,
Mhm.
yeah, less trauma, just much easier to do that. But where I studied homeopathy, they taught us the classical approach, but they also taught us a practical approach so that we all almost had more tools in our toolbox. Because I do feel that sometimes using one remedy at a time can be quite slow. Sometimes it can be
Yeah.
amazing and, it can create so much change. But I do feel in the environment that we're living in this day and age, where yeah, I mean, we're battling with so many things in our environment, aren't we? Toxicity alone. I
Yeah.
mean, and that's probably the reason why fertility is a growing problem. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. What happens if you choose the wrong remedy? What happens if not you, but a person who goes online
Yeah.
and finds a remedy that seemed to work for their friend and decides, okay, I'm going to do this for myself? Can something happen, or is it just really not effective? Like they may not get benefit.
Yeah, so again, I think if you spoke to 5 different homeopaths, you might get slightly different answers. But my feeling is because it's an energetic medicine, it's like it's only really going to do something if it resonates with your body, your energetic system. And so, if it resonates, then you're going to get a response. Now, you can get what is called like an aggravation with homeopathy, which is the same with pretty much anything. It is often caused, although there can be many reasons, but often it's because the person's body is very toxic and you're stimulating the vital force or their energy to be like, oh,
Hmm.
great, let's clear some of that toxicity out of here. So you're stimulating this cleansing process. And if the body's, not ready for that, not equipped for that, perhaps the elimination channels are a bit blocked up, they're not very open, then you're going to get, aggravation. So sometimes if you try a remedy that perhaps is going too deep, too fast, or yeah, it's like loosely relevant to the body, but not so accurately prescribed, then you
Hmm.
may get this kind of response. However, I would say it's always for the greatest good of the body. So it might be, uncomfortable in the moment, but it's always going to be, ultimately a good thing because, as we know, clearing that toxicity out is so, crucial. Um, but I would say you can't really do harm because it's an energetic substance. It's not like a full strength drug where you can, create toxicity from that substance, if that makes
Hmm.
sense,
Yeah, it's very
which can
safe.
cause side effects. Yeah, it's different. So, I guess an aggravation can look like side effects, but it's more an elimination as opposed to, um, being caused by the other ingredients in that medicine, if that makes sense.
Right. So the worst thing that would happen is you waste your money. You're just not doing something as effective as getting somebody who knows what they're doing and telling you exactly what's going to get you the best results the quickest.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so gentle, you can't really go wrong.
Yeah.
But equally very, very effective, because it is a minute dose and you're just stimulating the body's own healing mechanism. Yeah.
What's amazing about it, which is it seems like you would think that the stronger the dose or the stronger the dose is the most diluted. So that's what's
Yeah.
interesting about homeopathy. You would think that if it was more concentrated, it would be the stronger dose, but it actually gets stronger the more you dilute. That's so fascinating. Can you talk about that and why that is?
Yeah, of course. I know it's hard to wrap your head around it, but because it's becoming more energetic that we call it stronger. So, a higher potency would reach further into that person's past. So if you give a higher potency, a stronger potency, then, perhaps, I don't know, somebody might have suffered some terrible, sexual abuse like in childhood, then you want a remedy that's going to reach back, over
Hmm.
like 30 or 40 years. Um, and so, yeah, higher potencies tend to work better on mental emotional symptoms, and sort of lower
Hmm.
potencies tend to work on the more sort of physical
Hmm.
symptoms. Although not always, there's always the exception to every rule. And then the sort of middle potencies are kind of more for intense situations like, a traumatic experience from a car accident or like being in labor, any kind of high energy scenarios that are very
Hmm.
intense. Then you're looking for an intense potency, which would be something like a 200C. Um, but yes, it's almost that what I was saying before about you're extracting, so you're taking like, a little bit of the plant arnica and you're diluting that in 100 drops of water and you're shaking it. And then you're diluting it again and diluting it again and again. And the more you dilute it, the stronger it becomes because it's more energetic. It's a
Hmm.
higher vibration, and we are vibrational beings. But
Yes,
I think what we conventionally think of as strong, it's just a different paradigm, isn't it, when you're talking
it
energy
is.
medicine? It just
It's the
is.
less is more paradigm, and it's very
Yeah.
interesting. And water, so the idea really is that water has memory, which is fascinating on its own.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we are made up of water. So, of course,
Right.
it makes so much sense that we would
Yeah.
respond to remedies that have been diluted in water. And yeah, and it's quite incredible, really, isn't it? The power of these things. And my feeling is that, you know, as we move forward, you know, technology, healing technology that uses frequencies and energy is going to be the future. I
Hmm.
suspect that
Yes.
medicine, hopefully, will be kicked to the curb and we will stand in front of these machines that will just create so much harmony in the body that our body then just goes, oh, great, let's fix that, let's heal that, let's
Mm-hmm.
mend that, let's, clean up all those dead cells, let's build some brand new cells over there. And what a wonderful potential. And for you guys and for us, we've been kind of working on that premise for ages, but it feels like the world's kind of catching up with that a little bit more now, which is just so exciting.
It is exciting and I feel it for sure. And what's interesting is I've watched some videos on solfeggio. Have you ever heard of that? It's like a frequency, and they're frequencies that are compatible with our bodies. And the music we listen to are most of the time incompatible, and they can actually get you sick. So vibrations really matter, and they can change the frequency of your body and your cells and how they respond. And there's certain vibrations that are used as weapons that can actually impact your body. And I've even seen, it's incredible. There was a TEDx talk with a guy talking about using vibrations to tackle cancer tumors. And they've done that before. Now, it's obviously not mainstream, but it has been done, it has been looked at. And that to me is just insanely fascinating.
Yes, absolutely. There's this guy who was interviewed on a podcast. I'll have to send it to you. And he's set up this company called EE Technology, and it's coming to London. And I've actually got a session booked for my friend and I. We're going in
Mhm.
November. And yeah, it's exactly that. It's like you stand in front of this machine and there's like light
Wow.
and color and
Hmm.
sound, and those vibrations are harmonizing the body. So I just think the potential for healing is just exponential, isn't it? And it's only going to get more and more exciting. Yeah.
No doubt. And so let's talk about Joe, since you brought up that topic, because Dr. Joe Dispenza, my friend and we're from New York, so we have a little nickname for him, Joey D. He is a pioneer. We've both been to the 1 week retreats. I'm actually going to be in one of his retreats this month coming up. And I'm actually going to see my good friend, Roseanne Austin, who's a fertility coach. I don't know if you've heard of her before. She has a podcast.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I'm meeting her. We
Yeah.
had that in common as well. I had her on my podcast. She had me on hers, and we spoke about Joey D. And so we figured out a way. We said we're definitely going to do it one day, and we did. So we booked. That's the first time I'm going to meet her in person. But what Dr. Joe is doing is just, it is groundbreaking research. And he is bridging science and what used to be considered spirituality. I mean, it is spirituality, but it's actually starting to become tangible and measured, what meditation does to the brain, to the body, and reality. Like it changes reality, it shifts it. And we were just talking about quantum physics and how it's just fascinating. But the whole idea is that when you talk about spontaneous remission, because I read the book The Quantum Doctor by Amit Goswami, and he's a quantum physicist, but he also applies it to medicine. And he talked about how spontaneous remission, almost, they can't be really described in material terms, because he says that they're not material. It's almost like a skip or a quantum leap into a new reality where everything's just shifted and changed and your body's totally changed. That makes the most sense even to somebody who doesn't understand quantum physics. You're like, okay, new body, that's why.
Well, and that's what Dr. Joe says, isn't he? He gets you to visualize the future the future you that you want to create in your meditation, so that you basically go into the quantum field and then draw that reality to you. And it's
That's
just so
right.
fascinating because it can be applied to everything, can't it? I mean, and I'm sure you saw it,
Everything.
people getting out of their wheelchairs after a week,
Yes.
just incredible like transformations. And it just shows you that, yeah, the power of our bodies and minds are just so far beyond what we can even comprehend. And it's so exciting that he's proving it scientifically, because
Yes,
it's going to force people to recognize it. And I don't know if you're into astrology, but I follow, which is
I
actually the
am.
woman that interviewed the guy. So I follow this really amazing astrologer, and she's talking more and more about how, the changes in the planets are showing that, these healing technologies, and just people being much more open to these things, and, being more accepting, and the scientific research being there to prove it and to show that it really does work. And so I think there's going to be a quantum leap in
Mm-hmm.
people's acceptance
Yes.
around all these things in the coming years. Um, so yeah, it's a really exciting time, and I love that Dr. Joe is investing so much in the scientific research, because up until now, certainly homeopathy has been kind of, hauled through the coals, and certainly, um, had a lot of negative press in the media. But it feels like since COVID times, there's been a real resurgence and a real acceptance, um,
Mm-hmm.
and excitement around complementary medicine, which is really, really cool. And yeah, I think people are sort of waking up to those ideas more, and yeah, it's really exciting times.
It really
Yeah.
is, for sure. Who was the astrologer that you were talking about? What's her name?
Yeah, Pam Gregory. Yeah,
I've
she's
heard of her. I've
Pam
seen her
Gregory.
before.
Yeah,
She's so good.
she's so good. And so literally every new phase that's coming up, she's got a video on YouTube. So yeah, well worth following her. And she does some great interviews. Yeah. Mm.
We have a lot in common, obviously. But yeah, I
Yeah, for
think that for
sure. For
sure
sure.
the quantum leap is happening, and because that is just the message that I get through meditation, because of course I'm worried about the world and I have all of these things on my mind. I just want, like, I want us to finally, I think that there's a desire within all of us that we just want to evolve already. It's like you feel it. We're on the edge. We're getting pushed to the limit. Let's freaking evolve already. And I feel it, like, as a collective. And Joe Dispenza spends a lot of time talking about the collective. And that's why, of course, doing the meditation by yourself is huge and it's super powerful. But when you come together with a group of people with a collective energy that are all doing the same thing, then you become like a flock of birds, a school of fish, and you start to, it's almost like a cell by itself or an organism in combination with the cells. So the cells become an organ and they become a functioning, like, next level thing. And that's ultimately what I believe we are going to become. And what I have felt through my meditation is that it's not going to make sense, because if you look at how things are right now, it just doesn't make sense. How do we get out? It's going to be a quantum leap. It's going to be a quantum leap. That's what I keep hearing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Exciting times to be alive. And, even though it's been kind of stressful times, I really believe we've all chosen to be here at this time,
Yes.
and I do think that for us, working in this world, we kind of had a slight head start, and we're here to kind of help people through that process. Yeah, to a large extent, which is really cool.
Yes, and our belief matters. And definitely want to mention that
Yeah.
towards the end of this episode, is that your belief is everything. Your belief empowers, it powers, it's your battery. So it doesn't hurt you to believe in something that you may not fully be on board with yet. It's okay. And belief, you can actually move yourself in that direction. It's like driving a car. You're just turning the wheel towards a certain direction, which may at first be scary because you're afraid to get your hopes up in a belief that might be too much of your dream and you're afraid to even allow yourself to get to that place. But it won't hurt you, because regardless, you're going to get disappointed if you believe or don't believe, if it doesn't end up being the outcome that you want it to be. So allowing ourselves to believe, I think, is the key, because I think a lot of times growing up, or we're conditioned like, oh, don't believe in things that aren't realistic. And what's really reality? Again, it's like we are creators. That is our born nature. That's who we are.
Absolutely. And we're really being shown that, aren't we? That we can, I truly say to my clients that we're living in a time of our heart's desire, that we can create whatever we want. We just have to believe it's possible
That's
and
right.
get out of our own way, because often it's us that are standing in our own way, isn't it? So, I think the limit is only the limit in your own mind, and so yeah, but the belief in things before they've existed, I think that's the challenge that we're in right
Mm-hmm.
now. So I think
Yep.
you're absolutely right. It's really having that trust, and belief, and holding strong with that, and then bringing it towards you, as Dr. Joe
Mm-hmm.
says. Yeah.
Yeah, it's flipping the seeing is believing. I have to see it to believe it. No, I have to believe it
Yeah.
to see it.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Flip that script, right? Yeah, 100%. And yeah, we're really moving back to potentially much more magical times, aren't we?
I believe so. I really
Without getting
do.
too
Even though it is hard, but there's something that's kind of like a seed, I think, within my own belief that feels you could feel it. You could definitely feel it. And it's kind of like the emotional with any change and transition, there's going to be pain. You're going to have to go through seeing the old crumble and then move on to the new. So it feels painful to go through it, but it has to be the way it has to be in order for it to truly arise.
absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm
Awesome,
so jealous
Cassie.
if you guys go to see Dr. Joe. That's
I'm
so
so
cool.
excited.
He doesn't That's so great. He doesn't come to Europe quite as often, but hopefully he will do a follow-up in London in the next, couple of years. So we're holding out for that. Yeah.
Oh no, bring that to your quantum field.
Yes, that's true.
See it
That
happening.
is great.
I've been working on it. I have to start working on it again, but I'm trying to draw him into my podcast.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure he will come on.
We'll
Have you tried
see.
asking?
I have. They said don't stop asking. Like come reach back out to us. So they didn't close the door, but he's so busy. So but I'm drawing him into the field. So it will happen one day.
Yeah. Yeah, that will be so amazing for sure. Have you seen there's been a couple of fertility cases that he's like followed.
Yes.
Um, yes,
Incredible.
yeah. So he's
Yeah, I've
yeah,
seen
really
some incredible thing, just incredible. And then the woman that grew her thyroid, because it's like the vital body, basically, that's where you have all your information. They think that that's what it is, that it's not the DNA, it's the vital body that actually helps differentiate cells, because the vital body is almost like this matrix, this energetic matrix that shows, it's like this 3D model that the body knows to follow. Because if they take stem cells and they put them in different petri dishes, they'll with different environments, they'll grow into different things. So what but they have the same DNA. So how do you explain that if that's the case? What's the liver DNA and what's the gallbladder DNA or the skin DNA? It's the vital body that they believe is actually
yeah.
doing creating that differentiation or different parts. So that was really fascinating. But yeah, we can go into this whole rabbit hole, which I always love going into. But Cassie, so if
Yeah.
people want to work with you, you work internationally.
Yes. Yeah. I've got clients all over the world. Yeah, so go to my website, which is cassieeverett.com. You can find me there, sign up for my newsletter. And yeah, I'm working on a program called Fertility Fit in 15 days with 15, lessons. So hopefully that's going to be out in the next couple of months. If you sign up on my website, then you'll get to hear about it first. Yeah.
Awesome, Cassie. Well, we have so much in common, and this was such
Yeah,
a delightful interview. I really enjoyed talking to you.
me
And I
too.
mean, I can keep talking to you, and we'll definitely keep in touch. But thank you
Yeah.
so much for coming on today.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for having me. It's been great.
So that concludes today's episode. You can find all of the links mentioned on the episode notes. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to share and leave a review. Reviews mean everything to podcasters, and I really enjoy hearing from my listeners. You can also find me on my website at www.thewholesomelotus.com or email me at info@thewholesomelotus.com. I love hearing from my listeners. If you're interested and want updates as well as a free ebook on my top 10 fertility boosting habits, you can visit my fertility page on www.thewholesomelotus.com. I thank you so much for listening in and hope that you have a beautiful day.